Hey, everybody, welcome back. This is the Morning Sam, Morning Ralph podcast. This is, of course, the podcast for restaurant technology professionals. Very cool show today. I think we're on episode 34, maybe 35. Either way, we've got a guest, Edith Wiseman of FRANdata. Listen, this is going to be a great conversation because, as you guys know, restaurant tech is not just for franchisors. It's for franchisees too. And I often ask myself, why is everybody always going after just the franchisor, when the reality is just that there's a hell of a lot more franchisees out there that are ready to buy that you probably don't even know about.
Morning Sam, morning Ralph, make it pop, make it pop, make it pop.
So without further ado, let me give you a little bit of background. Edith, first of all, Edith, welcome to the show. It's so awesome for you to be here and for us to be talking again. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And it's great to talk to you as a restaurant tech guru. So I appreciate you inviting me on your podcast.
Well, fantastic. You've been with FRANdata now for I don't want to date you, but for like a freaking quarter century.
That's
You
right.
you are an expert in franchisee and franchisors. You have probably more knowledge than 99.999% of this entire industry. So I just to start off, how did you get into this space? You're the president of FRANdata, so that, you weren't always,
No,
but yeah. So how did that come about?
I think just the way things happen in life, it's just pure happenstance. Graduated from college, applied for a job. What do you know what to do? You know how to research. Applied for a company that does research, market research. And the rest is all history. I mean, there's a lot more that goes in between the then and now, but it just was sheer coincidence. And franchising is so dynamic and so different. There's something to learn every single day to keep you engaged for 26 years.
Absolutely. Listen, you're so modest, because the reality is that, you've been recognized everywhere from Entrepreneur magazine to, 1851. You're a top woman in franchising. I mean, I go on LinkedIn and it's like you are Captain Kirk at a Star Trek convention when it comes to franchising. So don't be so modest. You got to go on.
I think the funniest thing I ever heard was a guy came up to me and was like, "Oh my God, you're like franchise royalty." And I was like, I was just dying. I was like, actually, that's really kind. Thank
Yeah,
you.
it's kind of geeky. I mean, it's kind of weird.
Totally geeky.
It's totally weird. All right, let's kind of get into it. Now, the topic of this conversation today, is really about why franchisees are kind of like a hidden gold mine for restaurant tech. And that's what I want to talk about. I mean, the scale of the franchisee market in the restaurant space. What are we talking about here? There's like 65,000 operators, representing nearly 200,000 restaurants in the franchise space.
You got it. And it continues to grow. So absolutely. Those are some big numbers there.
Yeah, and so for the uninitiated, there's there's two sides of this coin. There's you have franchisors and franchisees.
Hmm. Yeah. So the franchisors are the brand owners, and the franchisees are the ones who run the business, who actually operate. But every single franchise is a little different, from a company like Subway that's almost 100% franchise. So that means they don't really operate any locations, versus, say, a Zaxby's, where they own a few hundred of their own locations. Right. So there's a lot within what that mix looks like, and it really depends on the brand.
So, as I alluded to in the beginning of the conversation, it's always been interesting to me how, sales professionals and marketers alike are always zoning in or trying to zero in on the franchisor. And, as we all know, this is probably the most competitive time in our industry's history with regard to just the sheer number of really effective and very cool technology solutions that are out there. You know, do you have any insights on why you think that restaurant tech companies in particular might be underestimating the franchisee opportunity?
Well, I think I would characterize it slightly differently. I think that
Okay.
they see a franchisor, right? So you see this just sheer numbers, and
Right.
you think this is the way to Easy Street, right? So if I go to the franchisor and I sign them up, they sign up with me, we sign a contract, that then all of a sudden I'll have business from all of their locations. So it's this like perception of Easy Street.
Yeah.
But then they spend all this time working the franchisor, and it's a long process because franchisors have to be very deliberate and they have to be slow because they have to make sure that any change that they make, they've fully vetted, and they're going to get maximum buy-in from their franchisees to actually adopt. So there's a long road ahead before a signed contract then
Mm.
becomes maybe, so on the best case scenario, it's a mandate. So you must use this.
Right.
That's the hardest and that's the least likely. And it really depends on the tech solution as to what's going to be mandated. To like, you're an option, which means you have a license to hunt. And that license to hunt might not give you any information with which to hunt. So now, yay, you have an agreement, but
Right.
you have no business. So there's, without having been there, done that, to know how hard it is, that people don't understand the road ahead of them or really what it takes to get that business. So, and then they all think it's going to be mandated.
Yeah, that's the thing. And there are a few brands out there that are in fact, that do have some pretty great mandates. And I think that if you were to start a new restaurant brand from scratch, chances are you would have more mandates. But the reality is that the especially with legacy brands, that's just not the case. Franchisees are able to, pick and choose the tools and the tech that they want to use. And so with that in mind, often I think a better strategy is to go after those franchisees without a mandate, that have that freedom to pick and choose what's best for them. Now the problem is, and I think this is this is where FRANdata can really help. And in full disclosure, everybody, Popcorn GTM is in fact a partner of FRANdata, and I guess you can call us even a licensed reseller. So anybody hit me up after this if you want to learn more. But what I was going to say was, it's often not the path taken because they don't know where to go. These franchisees are often kind of hidden in plain sight to a certain degree. They're just there's so many of them, right? And how do you figure out the complicated web that they are?
So what I will say is, so if we take, I just looked at Subway, so this is just hot off the presses in my brain. But
Yeah.
if you look at Subway, they have 20,000 locations, right?
Right.
And but really there are about 400 franchisees that have 10 own 10 locations or more. Right? So you need to first, as a supplier, understand the relationship between the number of franchisees and the number of owners, and also the turnover within that organization,
Mm.
right? Because as a supplier, you have to understand, like, okay, so I might get the business, but what's the likelihood that business might have to change hands because there's a natural there's an increased number of changes in ownership due to, say, the life cycle in a brand. or versus the dynamic in a brand that might be happening, which is there's consolidation going on. So there's a lot underneath the hood to really
Yeah.
understand about the franchisee demographic to be able to know who's the right target. But I want to step back for a moment, if I might. So
Please do.
one of the things that you asked, like, why don't suppliers or restaurant tech suppliers go directly to franchisees, and like, why should they? So I think there's one thing that's really important to note. So I experienced this in my business. So 1/3 of my customers are franchise organizations. So like, I deeply understand how franchisors buy, as well as I talk to a ton of suppliers who are trying to sell in this space. So I get perspective from both personal and from others. But if you think about a franchisee of a restaurant, is what are they doing? They are operationally focused every single day. They're watching the pennies. They're making sure that they're executing. So a franchisor is managing a brand and a system, and they're trying to drive the system and the brand forward. A franchisee is experiencing the pain of the day-to-day operations, right? So I equate this to, if I put my finger on a stove and I burn it, I really feel that pain, versus me telling you, Paul, oh my gosh, my finger hurts, I just burned it. And you're like, oh yeah, let me see if I could help you make sure you don't burn it again. You're not feeling the same sense of urgency that
Right.
I do, because I just burned my finger and that really freaking hurts. So there is almost, I'd say, a delayed reaction to pain at the unit level, unless it's a PR crisis, right? If it's a PR
Right. Right.
crisis, then it's an immediate pain to the whole point.
Everybody's on fire.
Right, exactly. But like, your day-to-day stuff, that's something that's going to aggregate at the system level that the franchisor will eventually address, because enough of the system is dealing with that pain.
Right.
So I think that, like, the reason to actually go to the franchisee levels, because they're the ones who are wanting to act on their problems in a more expedited fashion than someone who is a brand owner. So, who's more likely to act faster? That's what I would ask you as a seller.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a terrific. I'm not sure if it's an analogy or a metaphor or both, but I love that. They feel the pain. They're the ones, on the front lines. And if there's an immediate need, they're the ones that are going to, you know, express that. But here's the thing, everybody's going for the home run, kind of like we talked about earlier, right? Where we get, if you connect with the franchisor and they love they love it, they love the solution, they're like, yes, this will absolutely be beautiful and work across all of our locations. But the road to get there, as you indicated, is it can be a pretty long one, and often begins with a pilot.
I would say scale equals slow.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a very good observation. Scale does equal slow. But let's think though about, if I were to sales and marketing strategy, if I can align with, or rather sell to, one or two key franchisees, I, for all intents and purposes, now have a completed pilot that I can now go to the franchisor, to the mothership, and say, hey, I've got two really great franchisees here that are using our solution, and look at the data that I've collected. Look at how their operations have improved. Look at their speed of service. Look at their, their costs, etc. And it's almost like a relief on the behalf of the franchisor, of the mothership, when they see this data, and it makes their life so much easier. It's like, what? This is done. This is great.
I would also say that, so the smartest suppliers that I know are talking to franchisees first and foremost for intelligence. They're intelligence gathering. What are the problems you're experiencing in your business? They're trying to get really intimate to understand the brand.
Mhm.
Because as I said, as I kind of alluded to a little bit earlier, every single franchise brand is different. They have their culture is different. They emerged and grew differently. You might have franchisees who were with the founder from day one. I mean, there's a whole, you could have franchisees who were former executives. I went to a
Right.
franchisee convention, and one of the field ops person was like, yeah, there's a lot of former executives who are franchisees because that was their golden handcuffs. So like you have to understand the nature of who this system, the people in this system,
Right.
and what their issues are, their top issues. So what is everybody complaining about? And if you're talking to the influential franchisees because you know who they are, that they actually grew up with the founder, that they're the largest, that they are on a marketing committee or they're on the technology committee. So, like, you have all this information to know I'm talking to the people
Right.
that not only are willing to talk to me,
Yeah.
but also then you can test in their business. But then the franchisor is also going to listen to them.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And so let's unpack that a little bit, because I want to better understand sort of this a real world use of franchise intelligence. That's what FRANdata does, right? You guys are providing, essentially intelligence on these, 65,000 operators across 200,000 locations. Tell me, so well, before we unpack what is franchise, how do you help restaurant technology companies? Maybe that's a better way to frame it. How
Mhm.
do you help restaurant technology companies better understand their target, their ICP, who their ICP should be?
Right. So it's actually not a one size fits all question or
Mm.
answer. We deal with a lot of different vendors, and there are some vendors who, because of their price point and their value proposition, they have to have a certain size of scale of either operator or franchise system in order for the value proposition to work.
Right. For example, listen, I really can't talk to any franchisees that don't have is at 10 locations or less.
Yeah. And
Right.
they might even have to have an app like revenue per location, or have to have a certain number of employees per location. So there's, or like in
There's some
aggregate.
baseline ICP requirements that's going
Yeah,
to help you, from right out of the gate.
that's right. And as you mentioned earlier, there are some companies who they work really well with emerging brands. And so that's a very different type of target audience. And those franchisees might be as complicated as large brands,
Yeah.
but they might also be a little less complicated. So those factors we take into consideration first and foremost. Now there are some we also take into consideration capacity. So there are some suppliers who have the ability, like they've segmented their kind of sales force into, private equity focus, enterprise, SMB, that's more call center like. Their sales force capacity is
Right.
also a factor in how we decide what's appropriate and what's the right target audience. So we can use a bunch of our own data plus as you said, the ideal customer profile and their sales force and marketing capacity to really build out that profile of who's the right target. And so, then we can help identify who that is. So I'll give an example. If a company needs to have, they don't have, they're more call center based, right? So they
Mhm.
don't
Mhm.
have consultative sales types, right? Then we're certainly not going to target our Applebee's where they have 35 franchisees for 1,700 locations, right? Because you have to be a sophisticated seller to be able to crack those nuts. Not to mention that most of those franchisees also own other brands, so they're called multi-unit, multi-brand operators.
And that's something I want to talk about a little bit more as well. I just this the vastness of it,
Yeah,
the portfolio
yeah,
of franchise. Yeah, it's
yeah. So I mean, that is something that's important to consider. What's kind of affecting the marketplace in terms of what's changing. But I guess I can give an example of a customer who we worked with who had the capacity to target a large swath of franchise systems, and they were going very hard into the market. I have a testimonial from Restaurant 365, and I actually chuckle for how, like, the chief sales officer found us. He actually called the company because he wanted to buy a whole bunch of FDDs and was going to like build a database of FDDs of franchise information. And so the company that he called was like, well, I don't know that you want to buy that. Like, maybe you should call FRANdata. So he's like, huh, who's FRANdata?
right,
And he
right,
calls us and he's like, we tell him, okay, you want FDD data? It's basically a trash heap. It's a list of stores with some entities. It's not going to help you whatsoever. So anyway, then he ended up licensing our entire database of food service operations. And what I love about this even more, okay, so he gives us this example of like why this is a game changer, and he ended up referring people to us because they were building out their entire sales staff based on the number of locations. They were not building out their sales staff based on the number of owners. So he was, in some instances, overhiring and underhiring based on accounts. And so
right.
this helped absolutely streamline their whole sales revenue operations team to really inform how to better go to market. And the part that I love the most, this is sorry, I'm getting to it.
No, this is awesome. I love it. So I'm going to read the quote because it's a hell of a testimonial.
Is that we were doing a market research study for a company that sells restaurants. And so I was talking to a franchisee of Tropical Smoothie for this project. And this franchisee owns 7 locations, and he's building up to, I think, 10 or more. And he said, I just adopted Restaurant 365. And I emailed Will, and I was
Will,
like,
yeah.
I know you have his information in your database. So one of your sellers got it. I'm so proud of, it's so excited for you guys. So
Hooray! We actually and they use their they use their CRM and everything. So,
yeah.
it's that's a victory on so many levels. You have no idea. It's actually salespeople are doing what they're. I want to read this quote. This is from Will Emmons at he's a chief sales officer at Restaurant 365. This is a little testimonial that he wrote on behalf of FRANdata. FRANdata's franchisee database improved our sales and revenue operations, helping us allocate our sales resources by the size and ownership group rather than individual restaurant locations. The sales team had the correct contact info to reach the right decision maker. With a streamlined approach, we were able to shorten the sales cycles and unlock higher value opportunities. That's pretty good because here's the thing. Restaurant 365, this is I remember when I used to compete against them, and we were like, yeah, okay, whatever. And now they're absolutely a behemoth,
Mhm,
and I think that they owe in large part to the fact that they didn't figure out a way to unlock the franchisee area.
mhm,
And so, I think in our industry, particularly in restaurant tech, we all try to figure out, what are these little breadcrumbs that we can look for on, on these different types of paths towards success. And I think because the franchisee marketplace is so complicated, or rather so difficult to unravel, it
From the
become
outside.
yeah, from the outside. Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. From the outside. It's a very complicated thing from the outside because, and this is I think a really good segue to the simple fact that these ownership groups, the parent companies if you will, have multi often, multiple brands across their portfolio. And it becomes this really interconnected thing.
Yep.
So how now your company is, this is a human powered company.
Mhm.
Tell me a little bit about how you guys, play detective around all this stuff and put it all together.
Yeah, it's a great way to say it. I call my team a team of franchisee investigators
Hmm, great.
because that is literally what they're doing. So let's just take a company like, for simple purposes, Seven Brews, right?
Okay.
So
Great brand. Great brand.
great brand, very fast growing.
Yep.
It's a coffee concept. And, when you look at it from the outside, they're small, right?
Yeah.
Compared to other QSR chains. Um, but what you learn if you had access to where I sit is that their existing franchisees own almost 1,400 locations.
I say to repeat that. So their existing franchisees
Hold
own.
on. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
1,400 locations of 23 other franchise brands.
Right.
So they only own 327 Brews locations, but they own 1,400 of other brands, 23 other brands.
That's right. So if I think the message there is that if you're a restaurant tech solution, you want to grab some traction across, or better yet, think of it as like if you want to grab multiple pilots
Yeah,
across across a broad swath of of brands, because it's very often, um, you do a deal with a franchisee that owns multiple brands. They see how well it operates in one, and they're like, "Hey, is this something that could transfer cleanly to this other brand that we carry?"
right.
And then and we saw that all the time at Crunch Time. It was like, okay, so now we're doing this one. Oh, and then we're going to roll out this one, and and it can get a little squirrely because sometimes they may not have the requisite number of locations. But again, I think if you look at it strategically, in because these guys talk too, don't they? I mean, they talk to one another.
So, I mean, that is also the beauty of going what we call bottom up instead of top down,
Yep.
is because franchisees absolutely talk, right? So if I look at, like, I was looking at a bunch of Subway operators and they own like hangry chickens. And you're like, why is it that it just so happens that a whole bunch of Subway operators own angry chickens?
Hmm.
That's because they do talk. This is a system, this is a community of people.
Yeah.
And, like, I think there are some really great examples of, even in non-food, like everyone has heard of Massage Envy and European Wax
Yep.
and the joint. And so some of these franchisees went from Massage Envy to European Wax, and they all, because they all heard, and now they're in Cage Strong. So they all talk, and it's like, what's good? And they also talk about what's working in their business. They get together in
Hmm.
regional groups, they get together because they're friends. And once you have someone who is a believer, they
Yep.
talk and they share. And then, what's actually funny? Franchisees are very motivated by money.
Isn't that the reason why they got into it to begin with?
Absolutely. So
I mean,
I'm
we all talk about hospitality, this and that, but let's call a spade here, okay? These franchisees are in the money making business,
for
and
sure.
and let's, I mean, I'm
And
sure
they
that
love
I'm sure they're,
hospitality, right?
yeah, of
That they
course
love
they
the
do. Yes,
delivery. I
yeah,
remember asking a guy, like, a guy who was he owned some Checkers. And I was like, why are you in the food business? Like, it's hard, they're low margins, like high
Yeah.
turnover of employees. And he's like, Edith, people, they need to eat 3 times a day. I just need them to eat at my restaurant.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's not like something that's discretionary. You need to eat. And so like I was like, okay, I understand. But yeah, so they talk. I was recently, I'm on a bunch of advisory boards for suppliers, like private equity and the like. And I was at ADP has an advisory board, and they asked me to come speak to provide value to the people who are showing up. And
Hmm.
I got to stay and hear the whole everybody's opinions about everything. And what I thought was so, so smart about what they're doing is they're bringing in a group of franchisees and franchisors who are their customers. And they're asking questions like, okay, we're thinking of doing this. What do you think? Like, we're thinking of this promotion. What do you think? And getting their feedback. One of the franchisees, he was like, well, if I were to, promote you to my other franchisees, would you be willing to pay me? And I was like, always an entrepreneur. Always, always, always.
Oh, that is awesome. I'm going to shift gears here for a second, and let's talk about pitfalls and
Okay.
mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we know that there are some challenges with franchisees, with franchise sales. There's sometimes there's siloed systems, there's lack of visibility into ownership, there's fragmented outreach, yeah, SaaS tactics. It's a hard thing to zero in on. That's why, the FRANdata and the information you provide is so critical, because it gets you, it cuts through all the nonsense and gets you right to the people that need to hear your message.
Mm-hmm.
But what's the biggest mistake in your mind that tech sellers make when approaching franchisees?
So I think the biggest mistake they make is thinking that just because it worked in one place, it's going to
Uh,
work in another place. Right. So, in other words, I did a project one time with a digital signage company out of Korea,
okay.
and they were super successful deploying their technology into the hotel industry. And it was fast, and franchisees bought from a mandate, and they thought, great, we're going to go into quick service restaurants. We're going to do the same thing. And we flew all over the country, from Dunkin' Donuts to Pizza Hut to Starbucks, with them to interview. We told them this is not going to be the same. We interviewed Dunkin' Donuts franchisees. I mean, and what they thought was applicable from their previous experience, they thought was going to be a plug and play. And
Ah,
so I think that there's the mistake there of just applying what you know. As I said before, that franchisees from different systems have grown up differently. So
right.
if you look at like Sonic, for instance, a lot of these franchisees are legacy franchisees who are on the verge of retirement and selling their business. So, and now the new buyers who are coming in are very different. You've got a lot of like financial buyers,
Mm-hmm.
um, who
Mm-hmm.
are, private equity driven, who might have like just a guy who just graduated from getting his MBA and got a bunch of funds to buy some existing locations. You're talking about very different sales. I remember there was Zaxby's down in the South, like
Yep.
their people are very Southern hospitality. You
Mm-hmm.
try and rush them to a sale, it ain't gonna happen. I remember talking to a Zaxby's franchisee about one problem. It was like 45 minutes. And I was like, wow, this could have been done in 5 minutes, but it was really lovely. So there's a little bit of there's two things that I'm kind of identifying is you can't apply a one size fits all to restaurant tech with franchisees. You have to understand the franchise system and the dynamics within that franchise system, because that will help you be more successful. If you know that all of the franchisees that own Seven Brews also own locations, and they might be franchises in different industries, right? So they could own like a Sports Clips. Okay.
Right. So you'll
So
see that cross pollination of different industries. Although they might be in retail, they might be in hair salon, they might be in restaurants, etc.
that's right. So quick lube, right? Car
Yeah. Okay.
washes, these
Right.
things. Because franchisees are entrepreneurs and they're looking for the best opportunities, and they're also looking for, some are looking for diversification, or they might be looking for a reaction to something they already owned, right? So I know a
Yeah.
guy who was a Dunkin' Donuts franchisee who bought into Jersey Mike's, and then he ended up buying Salon Suites because he's like, I'm sick and tired of employees. So he bought a totally different kind of model, but
Yeah.
like he still owns Jersey Mike's. So like you have to know these things to talk to them, to appeal to them in the right way.
So
Um,
I love that, but something that you were saying that just kind of sparked something in my mind in terms of just, you know, I used to be a long time ago. I used to be in consumer electronics, and I was a marketing director for a 175 store chain called Tweeter, which is based in New England. And one of the things that my role was targeted marketing.
mhm.
And one of the things that were kind of an identifier for us as an opportunity was when somebody buys a new house, well, they often like to have new stereo systems. This is a time when you would have stereos and speakers built in your walls and things like that. So we would very often subscribe to new homeowner lists. And I'm just wondering, do you think that there is any correlation at all with new franchisees and their propensity, perhaps, or appetite for new technology?
So this is where I think understanding the brand is really important,
Yeah,
right? Because if you understand the profit margins of the business, then you'll understand a little bit more about their their capacity to invest in new technology,
hmm,
right? So if you're talking to a razor thin operation that's barely making any money and it's on a downward trend, I don't know that that's going to be the first thing that someone is going to leap into. Maybe they are, if they're a financial buyer and they're trying to like cut costs and they're trying to
right,
figure out ways to speed up operations so that there's this calculus for how the business will have an improvement in the bottom line because of this restaurant tech that they've added. Absolutely. So I think the knowing who the buyer is and their capacity and what the value proposition is to that capacity would matter. And so, but yes, I think new buyers, especially financial new buyers,
yeah,
they're coming in and they're trying to drive results because they're going to have a shorter hold period than maybe a traditional owner. Now, with that said, I will say, big picture. So I was at a franchisee convention just 2 weeks ago, and I put up on the screen this quote, and I asked people to raise their hands whether or not this resonated with them. Franchisees of the past were looking to get into business for 30 plus years. Like this is what they were going to do.
right.
Franchisees today are getting into the business to have a shorter hold period, maybe 7 years. And
Oh,
I asked people to raise their hands, and everybody raised their hand.
wow. So everybody's looking for a 5 to 7 year exit, we'll say.
10 years at top, right? Because a 10-year
Yeah.
term is the franchise agreement. But at this same conference, I got a call from a lender. 1/3 of our business is helping lenders evaluate risks to underwrite loans. And a lender was telling me he's got a deal with a very, basically a franchisee of a particular type of concept that generates $3 million with 30% margins, and was like, I just don't believe this is actually possible with an absentee owner.
Wow.
And so I validated it for him, top franchisee in the system. And he was like, wow, this is never going to value out. The point is this franchisee had only been in the system for like 2 years.
Ah,
And now
okay.
he's
So
selling to his operations manager.
keeping it in the so so how would this then how can we use that information, that sort of that kind of insight to help us better understand our targeting, our messaging? Is
Yeah.
that something that your team
Mhm.
can help can help with?
Yeah.
One of the things one of the things I was so impressed about in talking with Paul Wilbur, your COO, and Amy and the rest of your team is that just that, well, they have a tremendous passion for this entire industry, but more importantly, their insights are insane.
Mhm.
I mean, you guys, understand how the clock is put together, and and just as as a former tech seller, and industry sort of, someone that pays great attention to the industry, it's fascinating to me that we don't have more conversations around franchisees because of the layers, I think.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it's because of those layers. It's almost like an insulate. It's almost like you're wearing all of these different clothes and jackets and what have you, to get to the core of of what's going on down there. It's
Mhm.
how does you know how does a restaurant tech company, a franchisor, how are you working with them? Do you have an account executive? Like, explain to me, how does a restaurant tech company work with you to help them better formulate a sales and marketing strategy?
So, there's there's kind of layers to this because it
Yeah.
depends on what
Oh, you have
whether
all
or
these different subscription. You have different levels of reports and FDDs and
yeah. So it
yeah.
depends on, we've had people come to us with a new product and they
Mhm.
don't know whether or not the product is going to be well received. So we have a service called market acceptance testing where we'll go in and say, what are the existing products that are currently meeting the need? What are kind of the drawbacks? What are the opportunities? What do people like about it? And kind of match up and actually show parts of the product to franchisees and franchisors to say, how does this measure up against what your needs are? So that's like, I'm not sure that my product is going to be well received, how it's going to
Right.
be received and how it measures up and what's the existing competition. So that's like beginning stage. Say a tech company actually knows that, but they don't know, like, they might say, okay, I have a lot of times suppliers come to us because they're like, I have a few franchisees who are customers and they happen to be, IHOP franchisees. So I think they would be a great target. I want to get more of that business.
Yeah.
So that is, and so who else looks like IHOP from a perspective of their needs, like their sit down restaurants, their average check price. So some of this is really specific to what is the tech.
Mhm.
Some tech companies come to us and they say, like, oh, okay, I want to know all the emerging brands. Every time you have a new franchise that enters restaurants, tell me all about them and tell me all this tech stack that you could possibly know. Okay, so
Yeah.
they use cloud, they use Clover, they have two approved options. So it could be
So
specific
you can
to.
get pretty granular with, what are the tools and operational systems that they're using inside of these companies. Okay.
So we say we like to have an FBI file on every franchisor and franchisee. Now
Yeah.
that is a little overstated, but
And also a little weird, a little scary, but you are in Washington D.C., so I'll let it pass.
yes. So
Yeah.
but it helps us understand who these people are,
Yeah. Of
right?
course.
And then, what I love. So one of my people was just at a a lender conference, and he met this guy who owns a bank.
Yep.
And it turns out he's also a hotel franchisee. And it turns out he also he has a bunch of restaurants, and he helps other people get into franchising. So like when you talk about some of these people are complicated, that's a different level of complication. But the point is that we have all of that information in his profile. My favorite thing that I do is when I meet a franchisee, I'm like, let me tell you about you. Don't tell me anything about you.
Holy cow. That is wild.
So getting back to your question, which is that we can really understand from top to bottom. The best thing that you need to understand is, okay, if you're looking at a franchise or any given franchise, let's start is there a private equity owner? Is there a parent company? Is there a parent company that owns brands? Then how many franchisees per brand? And what does the demographics of that brand look like in terms of number of units owned by per owner? And then who are all those franchisees, and what do they own, and who are all the partners in those businesses? So that's the best kind of view from top to bottom if you're really trying to penetrate franchise.
I mean, this is truly like a completely holistic view. This is this 360-degree view, what you're talking about. One of the things that what I don't want people to, it's not a fair comparison to compare you to, it's not fair to Zoom Info or Dun & Bradstreet to compare what FRANdata does, to the information you can find on Zoom Info or D&B.
So it would be an absolute,
I mean, there's like major leagues and minor leagues here.
If we were compared, I'm very proud. I have a tech company who's going to give me a testimonial that says basically data aggregators do not get franchising, because when you have a franchisee that has 230 locations, and each of those locations are independent entity names, different entity names that you need to roll up, and they might have different partners under each of those entities. I have people who actually validate all of that. Data aggregators don't know how to do that or make those connections.
Right.
And oftentimes they associate franchisees as being employees of the franchisor. So the information they're giving is 1000% wrong.
Edith, listen, you've been so gracious with your time. Why don't we wrap this up with letting the audience know where they can find you? Of course, I want to let the audience know that I can put you in touch with Edith and her team. Please reach out to me. But where can we find you?
Find me? They can just find you. Yeah, well, you can also follow me on LinkedIn. How's that? Edith Wiseman, FRANdata.
She's a good follow, as they say. Listen, buddy, this has been awesome. We're going to do this again down the road for sure. It's been a pleasure working with you guys and your team. I'm really excited about what the future is going to bring. I'm really hoping that I can help our industry better target, better sell, and basically make better connections with franchisees. So, hey, Edith, thank you, man. You've been awesome.
Thank you, Paul. It's been great.
Awesome. All right. See ya.
Morning Sam, morning Ralph, make it pop.